Alright guys, had to go back again today. Hope you're all doing well and enjoying your day so far. An interesting period of roster changes could still be on the cards. It was looking slow for a few days, but Toronto have released Stanley from his contract entirely. An unrestricted free agent now. Any teams that want to make a change can sign Stanley for free. What teams could consider this, and what does it mean for the upcoming days? Very much enjoy your thoughts in the comments. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you guys are new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. A bit of a confusing one this for me from the Toronto side, and we'll talk about some of the reasons why in a second, because they don't really have their academy team over there anymore. There are some academy teams still going around, such as the Roker Academy. They've qualified for the Elite Stage 3. There's other teams to come on this as well over the coming days, and some of these guys might well find themselves in the Pro League sooner or later as well. It'd be nice if the Pro League was 16 teams. Unfortunately, it is not. But Los Angeles Guerrillas, they confirmed yesterday their academy team is gone. Now, the weird thing about this is I'm having to use Crone's tweet here about it, because Guerrillas deleted this tweet, I believe, this morning, my time. Bit confused as to why, but they tweeted out this graphic and they say, thank you to Neptune, our coach, Noisy and Diamondcon, and well, we're releasing you now, thanks for the time, all this other stuff. And now the tweet has been deleted, so I don't really know why, but the franchise will no longer field the Challengers roster, but Spart is still there as their sub, right, because they still need a sub, so they've kept Spart. And this is why I'm a little bit confused about this Toronto situation, because I thought they would keep Stanley as their substitute, because I don't really believe they've got anyone else who's a good candidate for that, because Hixie was their sub before they made the swap. So we'll discuss that here in a second, but they're still paying for Spart to be on their bench because they still need a substitute player, and maybe not the same story here for Toronto, we'll see in a second. So for some reason this has since been deleted, and there was also this, speaking of Los Angeles Guerrillas Masters, because relatively soon, and this was deleted as well, he's going to be flying out to Wisconsin for the Minnesota Rocker home series they're doing at that event in Wisconsin, and I believe one of their games they play is up against Los Angeles Guerrillas, so they're flying out there to play one game and then be in the crowd for the other game they play, I guess, against the Florida Mutineers or something. So bit of a strange one. Maybe RCT isn't the biggest fan of what Rocker are up to. I think it's a good idea personally, but it maybe is a bit of a faff for the players to fly over there just for one particular game. And you know, probably in hindsight, Los Angeles Guerrillas as an organization are thinking, well, maybe we shouldn't have bothered to even go along and do this thing. But also we got the confirmation from Ravens yesterday that Zero and Paulex are gone. Seems like they got reminded by the Stanley move, because this was tweeted out basically at an identical time. So feel bad really for Zero especially. I think Paulex, that change was inevitable in a way that Paul was going to go and they were going to bring in another SMG candidate, because with Nasty moving to the flex position, it just made sense that Paul probably had to make way for a player that could actually, well, maybe deliver more damage in the SMG department, had it been so good for some time for that team. And this is the thing though, again, what are London doing in terms of their substitute player? Because Zero, I thought, is pretty much the perfect guy to be your sub, good at all the roles if necessary. If you need someone to sub in, Zero can do the job, but they get rid of him as well, and I guess they're going to put their coach Dominate as their potential substitute player as well, which is very much confusing to me. I guess everyone's trying to save cost at the moment, and you can understand why. And also with Zero being released from London, that means he has the record still with the most series wins for Ravens in history at 30. Nasty's got to 23, and if he stays there for a bit longer, he probably will have that record. But I do wonder if, you know, in the near term, just like what happened with Afro, could happen with Nasty as well, the way that he's played. And also if London next season decide to, you know, effectively move to Madrid or whatever the ownership wants to do, then Nasty will be a free agent, and I'm sure that teams will take a chance on him the way he's been performing the last stage or so for sure. And also just a note from Nick here, that was noted in Ranked Play last night, with Nasty, Scraps, Dominate and Yuli. So of course, not their full roster, but Dominate is their coach, and Yuli is going to be their replacement for Paul, it seems, and Asim rounding out the roster in Dominate's place on this occasion. I guess he wasn't playing in this particular set in Ranked Play, but nonetheless gets the point across that Yuli is their target. He's the guy they've been scrimming with from the Challengers side, and well, will they change their minds with Stanley becoming available? That is kind of the key point here. Or if Yuli's working well for them, then I guess they'll go with it, and if not, then they could get Stanley on their team. Or will Stanley want to go in those directions? And those are the key points to discuss on both sides. So confirmation last night from Stanley, unrestricted free agent. This is quite the key turning point, I think, in this kind of roster change potential period before Major 4, because without this being a free agent or without him being unrestricted, do teams want to pay a buyout? The teams that are actually considering making moves, maybe a Vegas, maybe a London, maybe other teams like Minnesota, would they pay a buyout for Stanley, especially the one that Toronto would have wanted? Probably not, to be honest. But now he's completely for free. Surely teams have got to consider Stanley, because I'm sure he could upgrade some rosters. Whether he wants to go to said rosters, though, that's another part of the equation. So Toronto confirm it, effective today, we have decided to part ways with Stanley. It's kind of funny in a way, like they didn't even try and pretend, oh, this is a mutual parting. They were like, yeah, we've just dropped him, basically. I gotta respect the honesty in that way. We wish him the best in his career moving forward. I wonder exactly why, though. I know that Stanley, after he got dropped, was going a bit rogue against Toronto on stream. I don't know if that had anything to do with it here, but nonetheless, dropping him is a little bit strange, because they don't have the academy system anymore. There's no longer, last year they had their academy. They had Scrappy, they had Hixie, they had others on their academy team. They even had their EU academy roster, which had Beans on, that they eventually sold, I'm guessing, to Boston. So, kind of worked out their academy system, and now they've brought up a load of those academy players to their starting team. They're no longer doing it, but who's their sub going to be now? Are they going to put like one of their coaches down with their sub, or they just like really didn't want Stanley there anymore? Maybe they felt like the vibes and the chemistry with him and the rest of the team was never going to work, even if they wanted to bring him in as a sub, so they'd prefer just to get someone else if they did need to actually bring someone in for a game if anything did go wrong, as happened when Hixie came in last year for Toronto, right, during the Vanguard season. He subbed in for one series against Florida, and they 3-0'd them like in a super close manner, because someone was unwell, I think, and basically he had to sub in for that day. So if that happens again, Stanley's not going to be the guy. So he's been released entirely. As I say, bit of a surprise. But the other reasoning could be they wanted to sell him, and there just isn't a market available to sell Stanley right now. Maybe they wanted to get rid of Stanley initially. They've spent a couple of weeks trying to figure out whether they can actually sell him on. Because that's not happening, they've decided to release him, right? It reminds you a little bit of what happened with Hook. Now, Hook, of course, really looking back on it, had escaped a pretty terrible situation at Los Angeles Guerrillas. They parted ways with him. They decided, yep, we're not going to be able to sell him. So, we've dropped him from the team. I guess we'll just part ways and end the relationship. So he's an unrestricted free agent. That left it super easy for Optic to swoop in and sign Hook. And obviously that's worked out for them. And if Guerrillas had waited a little bit longer, there would have been a buyout coming through from Optic to Guerrillas to get Hook onto the team, I imagine. But Optic got away with one after the Pred thing collapsed. Maybe the same thought process here with Toronto and Stanley, and where therefore can he go next? Because this opens the door to many teams that wouldn't really want to pay a buyout for Stanley from Toronto, but might well get him for free, because we know how these contracts work. These contracts you'd think are more stable than they are, but the reality is that it seems to me that, let's say you're a Vegas Legion, they've already done this with Prolute. They just drop Prolute, terminate his deal, and even though the 50k guarantee or whatever that you're meant to get for a season just seems to disappear, you just end the contract. Seems like the teams have an awful lot of power there against the players, because I'm a bit confused how it's possible for organizations to sign a player for a 55k 1-year deal or whatever, that's the minimum salary, I'm pretty sure, something like that, and then if they want to, they can just terminate the deal, sign someone else for the rest of the season, and that player they signed isn't really guaranteed anything at all. So that seems to be how it is right now. We've seen organizations do this before, and they'll probably get away with it again, and they could do it right now. They could drop someone for Stanley and not have to pay any more money. They can put the salary they were going to put towards their current player, towards Stanley, no buyout involved. If that's a pure upgrade, then it could be done. And as Parasite says, you've got to think someone's going to try and pick him up here for free. Now, Stanley was super good during the Cold War season. When he came into the scene for Minnesota Rocker, he was incredibly good for that team. Was like one of the key standout SMGs, arguably Rookie of the Year, up there with Insight. I would say Insight and Stanley to me kind of 1-2 in terms of Rookie of the Year. Both of them won an event, of course, after coming in. Stanley won Major 5 with the Rocker, but then Vanguard wasn't such a good season for him. He goes on to Toronto, turns up at the start of the season, thought he was one of their better players, actually up there with Scrappy, then fell off a little bit. They decided, you know what, for decision-making reasons and probably chemistry and other factors, getting the most out of Kleenex, we're going to bring Hixie in. That obviously worked out rather nicely for them, and now Stanley is no longer necessary for their plans moving forward. But I still think Stanley can be a valuable asset, good slaying SMG if necessary, and there's certainly some teams that I do think Stanley can improve out there. Now, well, Rocker Racine, Blaz says in the replies, you'll be back, so maybe he thinks maybe Minnesota Rocker, but it's tough to say with Rocker, right, because bringing Stanley back in for Bance, to me, doesn't really make much sense. They're not the same type of player. Bance and Hixie are similar players in terms of what they do, the way they perform, their mind for the game and stuff like this. I always thought that for Toronto last season, when Hixie was there was a chance that at some point Hixie would come in for Bance. Turned out Bance has moved on, but it's kind of the same thing that's happened there for Toronto already, and it's probably predictable. Whereas Stanley for Bance doesn't make much sense, and if they are going to make a change, Rocker, you'd think it's got to be in the AR line somewhere, either a Cammy or whatever they think about attach moving forwards. But I don't think like Afro's going to go, or Bance could go, but Standy isn't the man to replace him in my opinion. So that leaves really some other teams on the table, and it leaves the Vegases or the Londons potentially, right? And it's the same story in a way with the subliners, because, you know, New York, are they going to change one of their SMGs? Are they going to break up the Hydra Kismet duo? Probably not. The other interesting one though is Surge, and we'll get back to that in a second, but I just wanted to touch on the Vegas and London situation, because look, if London aren't really feeling this Yuli pickup and they can get Standy for the same amount of money and just sign him as it is, they might well go for that if he wants to go. And this is the part of the equation to me, is that Vegas, if I was Vegas, I would try and be getting Standy right now. To me, what you really desperately need in that Vegas team is some slaying power from your SMGs. Clay and Temp are going to be good, but Two-Wheel and TJ, like in the respawns, like it's not looking good in terms of pure slaying. Like you've got to upgrade that if you actually want to have success with this team, in my opinion. In Search and Destroy, it can work, it's okay, but in the respawns, like it's just proved that it's not going to cut it. And whether you drop Two-Wheel, whether you drop TJ, like that's up for debate. But to me, if you can get Standy for one of those two players, like I think it's kind of a no-brainer. You've got to give it a go. If that team is actually to make progress, and if Standy was to join, I feel like he would feel quite confident there at Vegas that he could help them through to the World Championship, right? Because if he joins Vegas, there's a good chance Vegas overtake Rocker and get to champs. Not guaranteed, but there's a good chance of it. So I don't really think that you can just... I know that people say, oh, you know, look at Vegas, look at London, you don't want to join them because it's career killers. But it's like, if you've got a good offer in the CDL, if you turn down CDL offers, it really can come back to bite you. Mohawk did it, right? He turned down offers from Legion, he turned down offers from London, I think. And like now again, he's teaming with... He doesn't have the success in challenges, he's teaming with players that he didn't want to team with, and now he's really struggling to get that opportunity again. So if you do get league offers, you could turn them down, and it can work if you're a certain caliber of player, but still, it's worth meriting the consideration. And maybe Vegas don't want to make a change, maybe London are happy with Yuli, but still, if the offer comes through there from Standy, I think the Vegas one is especially enticing, really, if that was to come through, because you get to team with Clay, you get a good chance to play for an organization people are happy about and excited for, try and qualify for the World Championship. The other side of the story, though, is Surge, because is there a world in which Standy for Mac is a consideration they make? Just because Mac right now hasn't quite been at where they need him to be at times. They, of course, like when they went out of the major, it was really Mac that didn't have a particularly good series when it mattered. But at the same time, Mac does seem to work rather well with Pred. Pred was absolutely frying this stage, and I think part of that is down to his SMG duo. They've got some good experience there with Mac, and that's been the question with Standy. Is he getting the best out of his teammates? Because, you know, when Clinics was playing with Standy, it wasn't looking quite so good across the board as it is now with Hixie on that team. So there's an argument to be made there, right? But Surge are in an interesting spot, because that current team, can they win champs with it? Maybe they can. They won an event last year. I guess they're confident they can do the same again, but it's still far from a guarantee in my mind they're going to stay together for the long term. So maybe that's one other option. Rocker, I'm not sure I quite see right now, neither with the subliners, but then you've got Vegas, right? And to me, that's the most exciting possibility here, that maybe Standy to Vegas is an option. Just before we close out, though, I did want to mention here from Illy, right? Because he obviously did this tweet, well, back when Optic lost in the very first round to Boston, and well, he said yo, and obviously he's also looking to make a return. The thing is, for Illy, though, he's still on Optic, so there's no unrestricted involved here, and that also decreases Illy's chance to a degree of getting on one of these teams, if he even wanted to join one of these teams. But because he's still signed to Optic, he's still got a buyout in place. Like, Illy's probably not going anywhere anytime soon, whereas Standy might well be. But very much enjoyed your thoughts in the comments below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.
What, I'm what?
Heady, he was in MC.
What Heady?
Oh.
You saw that? Hey, yo, don't.
Nah, shit.
No, you saw that, bro.
Yeah.
No, stop.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. Yeah.
Donald, stop it.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yo, he's top green, top green.
Donald, stop, bro.
What the?
Show him, man.